Andrew grew up with a silent, unspoken promise to follow in the footsteps of a father he barely knew. His father, an honored officer in the U.S. Army, died during a covert mission when Andrew was just 8 years old. Left with only faded photographs and the stories of bravery told by neighbors, Andrew's idea of a hero was a figure draped in uniform, a distant but guiding star. It was his grandmother, Grace, who became the anchor that kept him grounded. The weight of grief didn't break her. Instead, it gave her the strength to endure. Grace, a woman in her late 60s, took on the role of both caregiver and breadwinner. She traded her quiet retirement for the humdrum of beeping scanners and endless queues at the local supermarket, working long hours as a cashier to provide for her grandson. Every morning, she would slip into her work uniform, a modest, worn-out polo shirt with the store's logo stitched on the pocket, before the sun even had a chance to rise. She'd pack Andrew's lunch, always including a handwritten note of encouragement, before heading off to catch the first bus. As she trudged through her shifts, her feet aching and her back sore, she carried the pride of knowing she was doing something meaningful, keeping her late son's dream alive through Andrew. But life was far from easy. Andrew, acutely aware of their financial struggles, did everything he could to ease the burden. He took up part-time jobs, spent weekends helping Grace around the house, and still managed to excel in school. He dreamed of joining the military academy, a goal that seemed as distant as the stars, but Grace believed in him with an unshakable certainty. "You're destined for greatness, Andrew. Your father knew it, and I see it too," she would say, her voice firm and resolute. Those words, spoken with such quiet confidence, became his mantra. Andrew threw himself into his studies and training with a single-minded focus, pushing through exhaustion and setbacks. There were times when it felt overwhelming, when the absence of his father felt like a shadow looming over every achievement, but Grace's unwavering support was the beacon that kept him moving forward. As the years passed, the small victories began to accumulate. Scholarships, athletic awards, leadership positions, each one a stepping stone towards his goal. And then, the letter arrived. Andrew had been accepted into the prestigious U.S. Military Academy. It was a moment of triumph, not just for him, but for Grace as well. She had sacrificed everything to see him succeed, and now her efforts were finally bearing fruit. The day Andrew left for the academy, Grace stood by the bus stop, watching him board with a mixture of pride and sorrow. He was embarking on a path that would take him far away from her, but she knew it was a journey he was meant to take. "Make me proud," she whispered, though she already knew he would. From that day on, their lives changed. Andrew was immersed in the rigorous training and academic challenges of the academy, but he never forgot where he came from. Every night, after grueling days of drills and studies, he would call Grace. They would talk for hours, discussing everything from his classes to her daily encounters at the supermarket. It was these conversations that kept him grounded, reminding him that his true strength came not from his physical prowess or tactical skills, but from the sacrifices and resilience of the woman who raised him. Time passed in a blur of sweat, determination, and growth. Andrew's name became known in the academy as a standout cadet, a leader among his peers. Yet, despite his achievements, he remained humble, his eyes always looking back to the small house where Grace still lived. He knew that every step he took forward was a testament to her, the real hero of his story. As graduation approached, Andrew's anticipation grew. This was the moment they had both been waiting for, a culmination of years of hard work, sleepless nights, and unwavering faith. He knew Grace would be there, front and center, cheering him on. Little did he know that her presence, and the events that would unfold, would soon change both their lives in ways they could never have imagined. The days were a relentless cycle of hard work and exhaustion for Grace. Each morning, as the neighborhood slept, she rose before dawn, her body aching from the strain of yesterday's labor. The fluorescent lights of the supermarket loomed ahead like the start of a marathon she knew all too well. Hours spent on her feet, scanning items, listening to the endless beep of the register. Each transaction a reminder of the distance between her reality and Andrew's dreams. She never let Andrew see her fatigue. When she came home, she would greet him with a smile, her eyes bright despite the heaviness pulling at her limbs. The tiny house they shared was modest, yet it was filled with warmth and pride. Grace made sure of that. She'd cook dinner, often something simple, while Andrew recounted his day, full of his aspirations and plans. No matter how tired she was, she hung on every word, her heart swelling with pride. But there were days when it was almost too much. Times when the weight of bills and worries pressed down on her like a physical force. She remembered the day she received a notice about Andrew's tuition, a figure that seemed impossible to reach. Panic had threatened to overwhelm her, but she shook it off, reminding herself that she'd find a way. She always did. One particularly grueling winter, Grace caught the flu. Feverish and weak, she should have stayed in bed, but missing a single shift wasn't an option. Andrew, noticing her pale face and the way she trembled, tried to convince her to rest. "Grandma, please, let me help. I can pick up more shifts at the diner. You need to take it easy." But Grace wouldn't hear of it. "This isn't your burden, Andrew. You focus on your studies. That's how you'll help." She managed to smile, but her voice was firm. "You let me worry about the rest." And she did. Every night, she would sit at the kitchen table long after Andrew had gone to bed, balancing checkbooks and calculating how to stretch every penny. Her hands, rough and calloused from years of work, shook as she scribbled down numbers, but she never let fear dictate her actions. It was love that drove her, love and an unbreakable resolve that Andrew's future would be bright, no matter the cost. For Andrew, seeing his grandmother push through these hardships only deepened his admiration for her. He understood the sacrifices she made, even if she never spoke of them. Her strength became his strength. He carried her determination with him through the late-night study sessions and the early morning drills. When his muscles burned and his spirit waned, he thought of Grace, of the way she faced each day's challenges without complaint, and it fueled him to keep going. The memory of a particular day stood out starkly in his mind. It was his senior year of high school, just before he was accepted into the academy. He had come home late after practice, drenched in sweat and exhaustion. As he approached the house, he saw Grace through the window, hunched over the kitchen table. Her head was bowed, and for a moment, it seemed like she was asleep. But as he got closer, he noticed the tears glistening on her cheeks, her hands clutching a stack of bills. He froze, his heart aching. He wanted to rush in, to tell her to stop worrying, to promise that everything would be okay. But he knew any promise he made now would be hollow. The only way he could truly repay her sacrifices was to succeed, to turn her sacrifices into something meaningful. So he turned away, walking quietly around the block until he was sure his face wouldn't betray the storm of emotions raging inside him. That night, he made a silent vow. He would give everything he had to make her proud. He would honor his father's memory and, more importantly, he would honor Grace's unwavering love and dedication. She had spent her entire life making sure he had a future. Now, it was his turn to give back. As graduation day drew near, Andrew's excitement was tinged with a deep, unspoken gratitude. He knew that the uniform he would wear, the medals he hoped to earn, were as much hers as they were his. And no matter what the future held, he would carry her spirit with him every step of the way. Andrew's acceptance into the U.S. Military Academy felt like a dream unfolding before his eyes, a culmination of years of relentless effort and dedication. Yet, as he held the acceptance letter in his trembling hands, the reality of what it meant began to settle in. This was the path he had envisioned ever since he was a boy, staring at his father's medals and listening to Grace's stories of sacrifice and duty. But now, the dream came with an overwhelming mix of pride, responsibility, and a weighty sense of leaving behind the one person who had made it all possible. The night before he left for the academy, Andrew found himself sitting on the porch with Grace, the crickets chirping softly in the background. They sat in silence, the air between them thick with unspoken words. Finally, Grace broke the quiet, her voice steady but tinged with a sadness she couldn't quite mask. "You know, your father would be so proud of you," she said, her gaze fixed on the distant stars. Andrew swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to speak. "I hope so, Grandma. I'm going to make both of you proud." I promise. She reached over, placing her hand over his. You've already made me proud, Andrew. Every single day. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but there was a fierce determination in them, the same resolve that had seen them through the hardest of times. Now it's your turn to find your own way. Those words echoed in Andrew's mind as he stepped onto the bus the next morning, his heart heavy with the bittersweetness of departure. The academy was everything he had imagined and more. A whirlwind of grueling physical challenges, intense academic coursework, and a constant pressure to excel. Every day was a test of his limits, pushing him to be stronger, faster, smarter. But it wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving, about proving to himself and to Grace that he belonged there. He threw himself into his studies and training, each task a stepping stone toward his ultimate goal. But the reality of academy life was stark and unforgiving. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, and the demands never ceased. There were moments when the fatigue and pressure threatened to overwhelm him, when the weight of expectations and the constant comparisons to his father felt like an anchor dragging him down. During those times, it was Grace's voice that pulled him back, her words of encouragement replaying in his mind like a mantra. He remembered the nights she had stayed up late, balancing their finances, her face lined with exhaustion but her spirit unbroken. If she could endure all of that, he could certainly endure this. The thought of her, working tirelessly back home while he pursued his dreams, fueled him to push harder, to keep going no matter how difficult things became. And then there were the letters. Every week, like clockwork, he received a letter from Grace. They were filled with news from home, snippets of her days at the supermarket, and, most importantly, her unwavering belief in him. "You're doing great, Andy," she'd write, her words a lifeline on the toughest of days. "Remember, the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations." Those letters became his anchor, a reminder of why he was there and who he was fighting for. In return, Andrew wrote back faithfully, sharing stories of his training and his classes, never once mentioning the exhaustion or the self-doubt that sometimes crept in. He didn't want her to worry, didn't want her to think for a moment that he was struggling. He knew she had enough on her shoulders without adding his burdens to the pile. As the years passed, Andrew's determination paid off. He rose through the ranks, his name becoming known not just for his academic and physical achievements, but for his leadership and resilience. He was selected as a squad leader, then platoon sergeant, each new role a testament to his hard work and dedication. But even as his responsibilities grew, he never forgot the source of his strength. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Andrew found himself staring at a photograph he kept on his desk. It was an old picture of his father, standing in full uniform beside Grace, who held a much younger Andrew in her arms. They were smiling, a moment of happiness frozen in time. He traced the outlines of their faces with his finger, a wave of emotion washing over him. "You're not just doing this for you," he reminded himself softly. "You're doing this for them." Graduation was just around the corner, and the thought of standing on that stage, of having Grace in the audience, filled him with a sense of purpose that was almost overwhelming. This was it, the moment they had both been working towards for so long. He knew she would be there, her face beaming with pride, and that thought alone gave him the strength to keep pushing forward. As the final weeks of his time at the academy approached, Andrew's excitement grew. He had achieved so much, but none of it would mean anything without Grace there to share it with him. She was his hero, his guiding light, and he was determined to show the world just how much she meant to him. The night before graduation, Andrew sat in his room, a smile playing on his lips as he pinned his final letter home. "I can't wait to see you, Grandma," he wrote, his heart swelling with anticipation. "We did it. Together." The day of graduation arrived in a flurry of excitement and anticipation. Andrew woke up before dawn, his heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and pride. It felt surreal. After years of relentless effort and sacrifice, the moment he and Grace had dreamed of was finally here. As he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his uniform, he couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had led him to this point. Each stitch, each medal on his chest, symbolized a chapter of his journey, a journey he had never walked alone. The academy grounds buzzed with energy as families, friends, and distinguished guests filled the seats, the atmosphere crackling with the kind of electric excitement only a momentous day like this could bring. Andrew scanned the crowd anxiously, his heart skipping a beat when he spotted her. Grace, making her way through the throng, dressed in her supermarket uniform. His breath caught in his throat. She looked small and out of place amidst the sea of polished suits and gleaming dresses, her work clothes standing in stark contrast. He knew she had come straight from her shift, not having the time, or perhaps not the means, to change into anything else. She looked tired, a hint of weariness in her step, but when her eyes found his, they lit up with a pride so fierce it made his heart ache. Grace's presence was more powerful than any polished speech or formal attire. She had walked miles to get here, had stood in endless lines and fought through crowds, all while wearing the badge of her labor, her uniform. It was a testament to her resilience, to the countless hours she had put in to support him, to keep their dream alive. Andrew felt a surge of emotion, a fierce, overwhelming gratitude that threatened to spill over. As the ceremony began, Andrew tried to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Grace. The speeches, the accolades, the formalities, they all blurred together, a distant hum against the pounding of his heart. When his name was called, he stepped forward, his movements stiff and mechanical, as if he were moving through a dream. He accepted his diploma, shook hands with the officials, and returned to his seat, his eyes searching for her in the crowd once more. Finally, the moment came when the cadets were given a chance to address the audience. Most thanked their families, their instructors, and their peers. The words were heartfelt, but rehearsed, the typical expressions of gratitude expected on such an occasion. Andrew listened, his thoughts racing. He knew what he wanted to say, what he needed to say, but the enormity of it, the rawness of his emotions, made him hesitate. But then he glanced at Grace again, her proud smile reaching him like a beacon, and he knew he had to speak. With a deep breath, he rose from his seat, his heart hammering in his chest as he approached the podium. There was a hush as he stood there, the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him, but he only saw her, the woman who had given everything so that he could be standing here today. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him, "I want to take this moment to thank someone very special." He paused, taking a breath, and then, like a floodgate opening, the words poured out. He spoke of his father, the hero he had lost too soon. But it wasn't the battlefield that had shaped his path. No, it was the battlefield of life that had truly defined him. And the warrior who had stood by his side was not his father but his grandmother. "She's sitting right there," he continued, his voice breaking slightly as he pointed toward Grace. Heads turned, and she shifted, suddenly the focus of the entire hall. "My grandmother, Grace. She came here straight from her shift at the supermarket because she wouldn't miss this for the world. She's worn out that uniform day after day, night after night, so that I could wear this one. She's the reason I'm here." The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. Andrew took a deep breath, forcing himself to keep going. "When my father died, it was just the two of us, and she took on everything, raising me, working endless hours, facing every hardship with a strength I can only hope to match. I've been called a hero for choosing this path, but the real hero, the person I look up to the most, is her." There were tears in his eyes now, and he didn't bother to hide them. "She taught me that being brave doesn't always mean wearing a uniform or fighting on a battlefield. Sometimes, being brave is just showing up every day, no matter how hard it is, no matter how tired you are, and doing whatever it takes to support the people you love." He glanced at Grace again, and the look on her face, shock, pride, a love so deep and pure it was almost painful, was more rewarding than any medal or honor he could ever receive. "This diploma, this achievement, it belongs to her as much as it does to me, and I want everyone to know that." The hall erupted in applause, but Andrew barely heard it. He left the stage, his legs feeling like jelly, and made his way to her. Grace stood there, tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling as she reached out to him. He wrapped her in a tight embrace, the world fading away as they stood together, holding on to each other amidst the roaring cheers and flashing cameras. "Thank you, Grandma," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "For everything." She shook her head, a soft laugh breaking through her tears. "No, Andrew. Thank you for making all those sacrifices worth it." In that moment, as they held each other close, the rest of the world seemed to disappear. It was just them, two people who had weathered so many storms together, standing on the other side of a hard-won victory. This was their moment, a testament to their shared strength and love. And no matter what came next, Andrew knew they would face it together, just as they always had. As the echoes of applause faded, Andrew and Grace walked hand in hand through the bustling crowd, the air buzzing with congratulations and laughter. Everywhere he turned, people approached him. Fellow cadets, officers, even strangers, all wanting to shake his hand, to commend him for his words. But Andrew barely noticed. His focus remained on Grace, on the tears still glistening on her cheeks and the pride shining in her eyes. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces as they finally broke free of the throng and found a quiet spot beneath a large oak tree on the edge of the parade grounds. Grace sank onto a bench, her legs trembling from more than just exhaustion. Andrew sat beside her, his heart still racing from the adrenaline of the ceremony and the emotional weight of the speech he had given. "Grandma," he began softly, his voice thick with unspoken gratitude. "I meant every word I said up there. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Grace shook her head, a faint smile touching her lips. "You've always had it in you, Andrew. I just made sure you had the chance to show it to the world." She looked down at her hands, calloused and worn from years of labor, then back at him, her gaze unwavering. "You were destined for greatness, and I knew that from the moment you were born." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the enormity of the day settling around them like a warm blanket. Andrew thought back to all the times she had been his rock, his unwavering support through every challenge. He had always wanted to make her proud, but he realized now that he had never needed to prove anything to her. She had believed in him from the very beginning, even when he had doubted himself. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead, and Grace sighed, leaning back against the bench. "Your father would be so proud of you, you know," she said, her voice quiet and full of emotion. "He's watching over you, Andrew, every step of the way." The mention of his father sent a pang through Andrew's chest. He had spent so many years trying to live up to the memory of a man he could barely remember. Today, he felt as though he had finally come close, not just in his accomplishments, but in honoring the legacy of strength and resilience his father had left behind. "I wish he could be here," Andrew murmured, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "To see all of this. To see you." Grace reached over, squeezing his hand gently. "He is here, sweetheart. In you, in everything you've done. And today, you've shown the world the kind of man you've become. Strong, compassionate, and honorable. Just like him." The emotions swirling in Andrew's chest were almost too much to contain. This day had been about so much more than just graduating. It was about family, about sacrifice and love, about everything Grace had given up so that he could stand here, ready to face the world. He thought of all the times she had put him first, working herself to the bone so that he could have a future. And now, finally, he could give something back. "Grandma, I want to take care of you now," he said, his voice filled with determination. "You've done so much for me. It's my turn to give back, to make sure you don't have to work another day if you don't want to." Grace's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with a mixture of pride and sadness. "Andrew, you don't need to worry about me. I'm happy to keep working, to keep busy. I don't need anything more than to see you happy and fulfilled." "But I want to, Grandma," Andrew insisted, his grip tightening on her hand. "I want you to rest, to enjoy life, to do all the things you've always put off for my sake." She looked at him, her gaze filled with a depth of love that nearly took his breath away. "You've always been so thoughtful, so caring. But remember, Andrew, the greatest gift you can give me is to live your life fully, to chase your dreams and be the man you were meant to be. That's all I've ever wanted." Andrew nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He knew she was right, that her joy came from seeing him succeed. but he was determined to find a way to make her life easier, to give her the peace and comfort she had always provided for him. He had already made plans, setting aside part of his military salary, looking into options for early retirement for her. But today wasn't the day to talk about those things. Today was about celebrating, about recognizing how far they had come together. As the afternoon light began to fade, Andrew looked around at the milling crowds, the groups of families posing for pictures, the cadets laughing and hugging their loved ones. This was the culmination of so many dreams, so many sacrifices. But it was also the beginning of something new. The start of a journey he would embark on with Grace's strength and spirit guiding him every step of the way. "Come on, Grandma," he said, standing and offering her his arm. "Let's go find somewhere nice to eat. I want to treat you to a proper celebration dinner." Grace laughed, the sound light and joyful, the weariness in her eyes momentarily forgotten. "Only if you promise not to let me fall asleep at the table. It's been a long day." Andrew smiled, his heart swelling with love for this remarkable woman. "Deal, but only if you promise to let me carry you out if you do." She shook her head, a playful glint in her eyes as she took his arm. "You've got yourself a deal, young man." They walked away from the academy grounds together, their steps slow and steady, the day's events still a vivid, almost surreal memory. For a moment, it felt as though they were the only two people in the world bound together by the unbreakable bond of love and sacrifice that had carried them through so much. And as they headed off into the evening, Andrew knew that this was just the beginning of their story. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dreams still awaited, they would face them together, just as they always had. Because family was more than just a name, more than just a shared history. It was the promise of always being there for each other, through every trial and triumph, through every high and low. It was a promise they had kept all these years, and one they would continue to honor, no matter what. Enjoying the video? Subscribe to our channel to receive more interesting content. Click the subscribe button and stay updated with the latest news. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the academy grounds, Andrew and Grace made their way toward the reception area. It was a grand affair, with elegantly set tables, uniformed waitstaff gliding between guests, and the steady hum of laughter and conversation filling the air. Andrew could sense the pride and joy radiating from everyone around him, but all he could think about was the quiet strength of the woman by his side. They were ushered to a table near the front, reserved for honored graduates and their families. Grace hesitated as they approached, glancing at the finely dressed attendees with a hint of uncertainty. She was still in her work uniform, and Andrew knew she felt out of place among the polished suits and formal gowns. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You belong here, Grandma," he whispered, his voice firm and full of conviction. "More than anyone else?" She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips, and let him guide her to her seat. As they settled in, Andrew noticed the curious glances cast their way, whispers that he knew were about Grace's attire. But he didn't care. Let them wonder. They didn't know what that uniform represented. Years of dedication, perseverance, and unwavering love. The dinner proceeded with the usual pomp and ceremony, speeches from military leaders, congratulatory toasts, and the occasional burst of laughter as cadets shared stories of their time at the academy. Andrew listened, but his mind was elsewhere, still lingering on the promise he had made to Grace earlier. He wanted so much for her, more than she would ever ask for herself. And then, as the evening wound down, the commandant of the academy took the stage. He was a tall, imposing figure, his uniform immaculate, his presence commanding immediate attention. The room fell silent as he addressed the audience, his voice carrying a blend of authority and warmth. "Today, we celebrate not just the achievements of these fine cadets," he began, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, "but also the families and loved ones who have supported them along the way. It is their sacrifices, their unwavering belief, that have helped shape these young men and women into the leaders they are today." There was a murmur of agreement, heads nodding in unison. Andrew felt Grace shift beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "And tonight," the commandant continued, "we have a special moment planned. One of our graduates has requested to say a few words." He has a story that I believe will resonate with all of us, a story of courage, love, and the true meaning of heroism. Andrew's heart skipped a beat as the commandant's eyes found him in the crowd, a subtle nod signaling him to come forward. He hadn't expected this. The spontaneous speech earlier in the day had been difficult enough, but now, standing in front of this audience, the weight of his emotions felt even heavier. But he had to do it. For Grace. With a deep breath, he rose from his seat, his legs trembling slightly as he made his way to the stage. The room was silent, all eyes on him, the anticipation almost palpable. As he took his place behind the podium, he glanced out at the sea of faces, friends, mentors, strangers. And there, in the front row, was Grace, her expression a mixture of pride and apprehension. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady but soft. "I'm not used to speaking in front of so many people, but tonight, I feel like I have to. You see, earlier today, I talked about my grandmother and what she means to me, but I didn't get to say everything I wanted to. So, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to share a little more." There was a quiet murmur of assent from the audience, and Andrew took another deep breath, his eyes never leaving Grace's. "When I was 8 years old, I lost my father," he said, his voice clear and calm. "He was a hero, a man who served his country with honor. But after he was gone, it was my grandmother who stepped up, who became my rock. She worked harder than anyone I've ever known, day in and day out, to make sure I had everything I needed. She never once complained, never asked for anything in return." He paused, swallowing against the tightness in his throat. "And today, she's here, sitting right there, in her work uniform. She came straight from her job because she wouldn't miss this for the world. That uniform, those clothes, represent more than just a job. They represent sacrifice, dedication, and an unbreakable love. To many people, it's just a uniform, just a symbol of her job as a cashier. But to me, it's the uniform of a warrior." The room was utterly silent, the audience captivated by his words. Grace sat motionless, her eyes wide, tears slowly trailing down her cheeks. "I've been called a hero for what I've achieved, for the uniform I wear. But the real hero, the person who inspires me every single day, is my grandmother, Grace. She has shown me what it means to be strong, to never give up, even when life is unbearably hard. She is my role model, my guiding light." Andrew's voice grew stronger, fueled by the emotions surging through him. "Today, I stand here because of her. Every step I've taken, every obstacle I've overcome, it's because she believed in me. And I want everyone to know that behind every soldier, every cadet, there's someone like her. Someone who has sacrificed so much to help us reach our dreams." He turned to face Grace directly, his voice breaking with emotion. "Grandma, I love you, and I want the world to see you the way I see you. A true hero." The room erupted in applause, the sound thunderous and overwhelming. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping away tears. But Andrew barely noticed. His eyes were locked on Grace, who sat there, stunned. Her hand pressed to her heart, her body trembling with the force of her emotions. As he stepped down from the stage and made his way back to her, the crowd parted, people reaching out to pat his shoulder, to offer words of praise. But all he cared about was reaching her, was wrapping her in his arms and holding her close. When he finally reached her, Grace stood, tears streaming down her face, and pulled him into a tight embrace. "Oh, Andrew," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't deserve this. I'm just a simple woman." "No, Grandma," he murmured, his voice fierce with conviction. "You're the strongest, most incredible person I've ever known. And I'm so proud to be your grandson." They held each other for a long moment, the noise of the crowd fading away, lost in their own world. This was their moment, a testament to everything they had endured, to the love and sacrifice that had brought them here. And as they stood together, surrounded by applause and admiration, Andrew knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever the future held, they would face it together. Because they were a team, a family, bound by a love that no hardship could ever break. The next morning, as the sun streamed through the small windows of the motel room they were staying in, Andrew awoke to the sound of Grace's soft humming. He rubbed his eyes, the events of the previous night flooding back to him in a rush. The speech, the applause, the way people had come up to Grace afterward, their faces filled with admiration and respect. He had never seen her look so overwhelmed, yet so deeply touched. He found her sitting at the tiny table by the window, a cup of coffee cradled in her hands, her eyes lost in thought. She looked up as he approached, her smile warm but her gaze still clouded with disbelief. "Morning, Grandma," he said softly, pulling up a chair beside her. "How are you feeling?" She shook her head, a faint laugh escaping her lips. "I'm not sure, to be honest. I keep thinking I'll wake up and find out it was all a dream." Andrew reached out, covering her hand with his. "It wasn't a dream. Every word I said, I meant it. You've always been the hero in my story, and now the world knows it too." Grace's eyes shimmered with tears, but she blinked them away, squeezing his hand gently. "I never imagined. I just did what I had to do, Andrew. I never thought anyone would see it as special." "It is special," he insisted. "What you did for me, the sacrifices you made. It's incredible. And now people understand that. You should have seen the way they looked at you last night, Grandma. You inspired them." She looked away, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I'm not used to that kind of attention. All those people wanting to talk to me, to shake my hand. It was overwhelming." "I know," he said gently, "but you deserve every bit of it. And it's not just last night. People are still talking about it." He pulled out his phone and opened the social media app, showing her the posts and comments that had flooded in overnight. Videos of his speech had gone viral, shared thousands of times. There were messages of gratitude, stories from others who had been raised by grandparents or hardworking parents, people who had struggled and persevered just like Grace. It was as if a dam had broken, and now, the stories of everyday heroes were pouring out, each one a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit. Grace stared at the screen, her eyes wide with disbelief. "All these people, they're talking about us?" "They're talking about you, Grandma," Andrew corrected softly. "You've touched so many lives. Look at all these comments, people thanking you, sharing their own stories. You've started something important." She seemed at a loss for words, her gaze flitting between the screen and Andrew's face. "I don't know what to say. I've never thought of myself as well as anything more than a grandmother doing her best." "That's exactly why you're so special," Andrew said, his voice filled with emotion. "You've shown people that being a hero doesn't mean wearing a uniform or having a title. It means showing up every day, no matter how hard it is, and doing everything you can for the people you love." They spent the morning reading through the messages together, Grace's astonishment growing with each new story they encountered. People from all over the country, from different walks of life, were reaching out to thank her, to share how her story had inspired them. It was overwhelming, but also deeply moving. Grace had spent so many years quietly doing her best, never expecting recognition or praise. Now, to see her efforts acknowledged on such a grand scale, it was almost too much to take in. But as the hours passed, Andrew noticed something changing in her. The initial shock began to give way to a quiet pride, a soft glow in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. She was beginning to understand, to truly accept, that what she had done mattered, not just to him, but to so many others. That afternoon, as they walked through the town, people recognized her. They stopped to say hello, to thank her, to tell her how much her story had meant to them. Grace, still adjusting to the attention, responded with her usual kindness and humility, but Andrew could see the difference. She stood a little taller, her smile a little brighter, as if she were finally beginning to believe that she was, indeed, a hero in her own right. Later that evening, back at the motel, Andrew received a call from the commandant. There was a formal tone to his voice, but also a hint of excitement. "Andrew, I wanted to let you know that your speech has made quite an impact. We've been receiving messages and calls from all over, people moved by what you said, by your grandmother's story. There's talk of an official recognition ceremony, something to honor her contributions." Andrew's heart leapt at the words. "That's incredible, sir. She deserves it." "I agree," the commandant said. "We're still working out the details, but I'll keep you updated." In the meantime, I just wanted to say thank you for reminding us all what true heroism looks like." As he hung up, Andrew turned to Grace, a broad smile spreading across his face. "Grandma, you're not going to believe this. They want to honor you, officially. The military wants to recognize you for everything you've done." Grace's eyes widened, a mixture of astonishment and disbelief crossing her features. "Me? Why would they do that?" "Because you've shown what it means to be truly brave," Andrew said, his voice filled with pride. "You've been my rock, my strength. And now, everyone knows it." She shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "Oh, Andrew, I don't need any ceremonies or awards. I've already got everything I could ever want. You're living your dream, and that's more than enough for me." But Andrew could see the emotion in her eyes, the way she blinked rapidly to keep her tears at bay. He knew that, deep down, this recognition meant something to her, something she would never admit out loud. Over the next few days, the momentum continued to build. News outlets picked up the story, journalists called, and the flood of messages continued. Grace was invited to speak at local events, to share her story and the lessons she had learned over the years. Each time, she spoke with the same quiet dignity and grace that Andrew had always admired, her words touching the hearts of everyone who heard them. And through it all, Andrew was there, by her side, watching with pride as his grandmother. A woman who had spent her life in the background, working tirelessly to support him, finally took her place in the spotlight. It was more than he had ever hoped for, more than he had ever dreamed possible. As the week drew to a close, they received the official invitation from the military, a ceremony to honor Grace's contributions, to recognize her as a true hero. It was to be held at the academy, the place where Andrew's journey had begun, and where, in so many ways, their shared story had taken flight. For Andrew, it felt like the perfect culmination of everything they had been through. A moment of recognition not just for him, but for the woman who had made it all possible. And as he looked at Grace, her face radiant with a quiet, almost hesitant joy, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their story, one where her light, her strength, and her love would continue to shine, inspiring others just as they had inspired him. The days leading up to the ceremony passed in a whirlwind. The recognition Grace was about to receive had attracted nationwide attention, and the academy grounds buzzed with activity as the event was prepared. News vans lined the entrance, reporters eagerly awaiting the chance to speak to the woman whose story had captured the hearts of so many. For Grace, it was all surreal. The spotlight, the sudden flood of attention. It was so far removed from the quiet life she'd always known. Every day, new letters arrived, strangers reaching out to thank her for her strength, for her resilience. People called her an inspiration, a beacon of hope. It was overwhelming, and more than once, she caught herself wondering if it was all a dream. Andrew stayed close by her side, helping her navigate this strange new world of interviews and appearances. He watched her with pride as she answered questions with her characteristic humility, her voice steady and calm even as she spoke about the hardships she had faced. She always turned the focus back to him, insisting that she had only done what any loving grandmother would do. But Andrew knew better. He knew that Grace's story was special because she was special, a woman who had faced unimaginable difficulties and never wavered, never lost her faith or her strength. And now, finally, the world was seeing her for who she truly was. The day of the ceremony dawned clear and bright, the sky a vivid blue above the academy's stately buildings. The grounds were filled with people, military personnel, community leaders, families, all gathered to honor a woman who had shown that true heroism isn't always found on the battlefield. Cameras flashed as Grace and Andrew arrived, the air alive with excitement and anticipation. As they made their way to the stage, Andrew felt a surge of emotion. This was more than just a ceremony. It was a recognition of everything they had been through together. The years of struggle, the quiet moments of determination, the countless sacrifices. Today, all of that was being honored. And it was all because of Grace, because of the strength and love she had poured into every aspect of his life. They took their seats at the front of the stage, surrounded by dignitaries and officials. Grace looked around, her eyes wide with awe. Andrew, I still can't believe all this is for me, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. It is, Grandma, he said, squeezing her hand. You deserve every bit of it. The ceremony began with the national anthem, followed by speeches from military leaders who spoke about the importance of family, of the support systems that allow soldiers to thrive. They talked about Grace's story, about how her unwavering dedication had inspired so many. Each word felt like a validation, a recognition of everything Grace had done, and Andrew felt his heart swell with pride. Then, it was time for the main event. The commandant took the stage, his presence commanding and dignified. He spoke about the meaning of service, about the sacrifices made not just by those in uniform, but by their families, the unsung heroes who support them from behind the scenes. Today, he said, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, we honor a woman who embodies the true spirit of heroism. Grace, your story has moved the nation. You've shown us what it means to persevere, to love, and to never give up. Your grandson's achievements are a testament to your strength and your dedication. And today, we recognize you for everything you have done. Grace's eyes filled with tears as she stood, her legs trembling beneath her. Andrew was by her side, his arm around her shoulders, supporting her as they stepped forward. The commandant presented her with a medal, its gold surface gleaming in the sunlight. It was a symbol of honor, of recognition for the years of hard work and sacrifice that had brought them to this moment. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound thunderous and overwhelming. Grace stood there, tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking as she accepted the medal. It was more than she had ever dreamed of, more than she had ever thought possible. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the smiles and the tears, and felt a deep, profound sense of gratitude. I don't know what to say, she began, her voice trembling. I never imagined something like this could happen. I'm just a grandmother. I just did what I thought was right. She paused, her gaze finding Andrew's, her eyes filled with love. My grandson is the real hero here. He's the one who worked so hard, who never gave up. All I did was stand by him, to make sure he knew he was loved and supported. And I think that's what all of us do, in our own way. We lift each other up, we help each other through the hard times. Her voice grew stronger as she continued, the emotion clear in every word. I'm so proud of Andrew, of everything he's accomplished. And I'm so grateful to all of you for recognizing that sometimes it's the quiet heroes, the ones who don't wear uniforms or medals, who make the biggest difference. The applause was deafening, a wave of love and admiration washing over them. Andrew felt tears pricking at his eyes as he looked at his grandmother, standing tall and proud, the medal gleaming around her neck. This was her moment, a recognition of everything she had given, everything she had sacrificed. And he knew, deep in his heart, that it was only the beginning. As they left the stage, people crowded around Grace, shaking her hand, thanking her for her words, for her example. She handled it all with grace and humility, her smile radiant, her eyes shining with tears. Andrew stayed close, watching as she spoke to each person, her words heartfelt and sincere. Later, as the crowd began to disperse, they found a quiet spot beneath the shade of a large tree. Grace sank onto the bench, her hands trembling slightly as she looked down at the medal in her lap. It's beautiful, she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. But I still can't believe it's real. It's real, Grandma, Andrew said softly, his heart full as he watched her. And it's yours. You've earned it. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with love. No, Andrew, we earned it. Together. He smiled, his chest tight with emotion. Yeah, Grandma. Together. They sat there for a long time, the medal glinting in the sunlight, a symbol of everything they had overcome. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass, Andrew felt a sense of peace, of fulfillment. They had come so far, faced so much, and now they were here, stronger, closer, more united than ever. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. Because that was what family meant. That was what love meant. And that was what had brought them to this moment, this beautiful, perfect moment of recognition and pride. The sun was beginning to set on the academy grounds, casting a warm, golden light over the crowd that still lingered, reluctant to let go of the day's emotional high. Grace and Andrew had stepped away from the hustle and bustle, finding a quiet spot near the edge of the ceremony area. They sat together on a low stone wall, the medal still around Grace's neck, her fingers brushing over it as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. "It's funny," she said softly, her gaze distant. "All my life, I've worked hard, tried to do right by my family, by you. And I never thought anyone outside our little world would notice." Andrew glanced at her, his heart swelling with love and pride. "People notice, Grandma. Sometimes it just takes a little longer for the world to catch up to the truth." She smiled, her eyes soft and reflective. "You know, I always thought the biggest honor I'd ever receive would be a thank you from a customer who remembered my name or a pat on the back from my boss after a long shift. It's more than I ever imagined." "Because you've given more than anyone could ever ask," Andrew said, his voice filled with emotion. "You've been more than a grandmother to me, Grandma. You've been my rock, my guide, my hero." Before Grace could respond, a man in a sharp military uniform approached, his posture crisp and formal. Andrew recognized him as the Secretary of Defense, his presence adding another layer of gravitas to an already extraordinary day. He stopped in front of them, a respectful smile on his face. "Grace, I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his tone warm and genuine. "I just wanted to personally thank you for sharing your story. It's touched so many people, including myself." Grace blinked, clearly taken aback. "Thank you, sir. I'm just a grandmother. I didn't do anything special." The secretary shook his head, his expression earnest. "That's where you're wrong. You've shown us what true courage looks like. It's not just about serving on the front lines. It's about the quiet strength it takes to support those who do. You've given so much to this country through your grandson, and we're all deeply grateful." He gestured to an aide, who stepped forward carrying a polished wooden box. The secretary opened it, revealing a beautifully crafted plaque, engraved with Grace's name and the words, "In recognition of extraordinary service and sacrifice." "We wanted to present you with this, Grace," the secretary said, his voice steady and sincere, "as a symbol of our appreciation and as a reminder that heroes come in many forms. You've inspired a nation, and we're honored to be able to give you this small token of our gratitude." Grace's hands shook as she reached out, her fingers tracing the engraved letters. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she was overwhelmed, lost in the significance of the moment. Then she looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "I don't know what to say. I'm so humbled, so honored." The secretary smiled, his eyes kind. "You've said more than enough, Grace. You've shown us all what it means to be truly selfless, to give without expecting anything in return. That's the greatest gift anyone can give." Andrew felt his throat tighten as he watched his grandmother accept the plaque, her hands trembling, her face a mixture of awe and disbelief. This moment, this recognition, was more than he had ever hoped for her. It was a validation of everything she had endured, of the strength and resilience she had shown every single day of his life. As the secretary moved on to speak with other guests, Grace sat down again, her hands still clutching the plaque as if it might vanish if she let go. She looked at Andrew, her eyes filled with a depth of emotion that he could barely comprehend. "Andrew, I don't deserve this," she murmured, shaking her head. "I'm just me. I just did what needed to be done." He reached out, his hand covering hers, his voice firm and full of love. "You deserve this and so much more, Grandma. You've given me everything, and now, the world is finally seeing you for who you are. This is just the beginning." They sat together in silence for a while, the fading light casting long shadows across the grass. Andrew thought about all the people who had been touched by Grace's story, about the letters and messages they had received, each one a testament to the impact she had made. It was more than just a moment in the spotlight. It was a movement, a recognition of the countless unsung heroes who lived their lives with quiet courage and unwavering love. Later that evening, as they walked back to their car, Andrew noticed the way people continued to look at Grace, their faces filled with admiration and respect. Some even stopped to thank her, to tell her how much her words had meant to them. Each time, Grace responded with the same gentle humility, her smile genuine and warm. When they finally reached the car, she turned to him, her eyes shining in the dim light. "I still can't believe it, Andrew. All these people, all these kind words. It's more than I ever thought I'd experience." He smiled, his heart full. "Believe it, Grandma. You've touched so many lives. And this is just the beginning. Your story is out there now. People are listening, and they're being inspired by you." She shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "I'm just glad if I can help someone else, if I can show them that they're not alone, that what they're doing matters." "You're doing that and so much more," he assured her, his voice full of conviction. "You're showing people that heroes don't always wear capes or uniforms. Sometimes they wear aprons and work long hours and still manage to give everything they have to the people they love." As they drove back to the motel, the sky darkening around them, Grace sat quietly, her eyes reflecting the passing lights. Andrew glanced at her, his heart swelling with pride and love. He knew that this was a moment they would both remember forever, a moment when the world had seen his grandmother for the incredible person she was. But more than that, it was a promise that her story, her strength, would continue to inspire, to show others that even in the quietest corners of life, true heroism could be found. And as they pulled into the motel parking lot, Andrew felt a deep sense of peace, a knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with the same courage and love that had brought them this far. Grace turned to him, her smile soft and full of love. "Thank you, Andrew, for everything, for believing in me, for sharing our story. I'm so proud of you." He reached out, his hand warm and steady over hers. "I'm proud of you too, Grandma, more than you'll ever know." And as they sat there, the night settling gently around them, Andrew knew that no matter what the future held, they had already achieved something truly extraordinary. They had shown the world the power of love, of resilience, of quiet, unbreakable strength. And that was a legacy that would last forever. In the weeks that followed the ceremony, life took on a new rhythm for Grace and Andrew. The overwhelming attention gradually gave way to a steady stream of messages and letters from people whose lives had been touched by Grace's story. Invitations to speak at events continued to pour in, and while Grace was hesitant at first, Andrew encouraged her to share her experiences. He knew that her words carried a powerful message, one that needed to be heard. One sunny afternoon, as they sat together on the porch of their modest home, a letter arrived that would change everything once again. It was from a national organization that supported military families, offering to partner with Grace to create a scholarship fund in her name. The Grace Walker Resilience Scholarship would provide financial assistance to children of working-class families, helping them achieve their dreams just as Grace had helped Andrew achieve his. Grace read the letter in stunned silence, her eyes filling with tears as the significance of the offer sank in. She looked up at Andrew, her hands trembling. "They want to name a scholarship after me," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "Yes, Grandma," he said, his heart swelling with pride. "Because your story is about more than just what you did for me. It's about the strength and love you've shown all your life. This scholarship will help other families who are struggling, just like we were. It's your legacy." Grace was quiet for a long time, her eyes fixed on the letter in her hands. Then she nodded slowly, a small, determined smile spreading across her face. "If it can help others, if it can make things easier for even one family, then I'm honored to do it." From that moment on, Grace threw herself into the project with the same dedication she had always shown. She met with the organization's representatives, shared her story at fundraisers, and even recorded a series of videos talking about the importance of resilience and perseverance. Her natural warmth and sincerity resonated with everyone who met her, and the scholarship fund quickly gained traction, raising more money than anyone had expected. Andrew watched it all with a sense of awe and gratitude. He had always known how special Grace was, but seeing the impact she was having on so many lives filled him with a new appreciation for the woman who had raised him. Her strength, her kindness, her unwavering determination. These were the qualities that had shaped him, that had inspired him to be the best version of himself. One evening, after a particularly successful fundraiser, they sat together on the porch, the sky above them a canvas of stars. Grace was quiet, her gaze thoughtful as she sipped her tea. Andrew glanced at her, sensing the weight of her thoughts. "Penny for your thoughts, Grandma?" he asked gently, leaning back in his chair. She smiled, her eyes soft with emotion. "I've been thinking about your father," she said quietly, "about how proud he would be of you, of everything you've accomplished, and how proud he would be of this scholarship, of the way it's helping others." Andrew nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I think about him a lot too, about how much he sacrificed for us, and how much you've sacrificed to keep his memory alive. I just hope I'm making both of you proud." Grace reached over, her hand covering his. "You have, Andrew. You've made us both so proud. But more than that, you've become the man you were always meant to be. Kind, strong, and brave. Not because of what you've done, but because of who you are." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the quiet hum of crickets filling the air around them. Andrew thought about everything they had been through, the long nights and hard days, the laughter and the tears. He thought about the future, about all the people Grace would continue to inspire, all the lives she would touch through her words and her actions. "Do you ever wonder what's next?" he asked softly, breaking the silence. Grace laughed, a light, joyous sound that filled the night. "I'm 82 years old, Andrew. I think I've learned to take things one day at a time." He smiled, his heart swelling with love for this incredible woman. "Well, whatever comes next, I'm just glad we're in it together." She looked at him, her eyes shining with a deep, abiding love. "Always, Andrew. We've always been a team, and we always will be." In the months that followed, the scholarship fund grew beyond their wildest dreams. It became a beacon of hope for countless families, providing opportunities that would have otherwise been out of reach. Grace traveled across the country, speaking at events and meeting students whose lives had been changed because of her story. Each time she spoke, she shared the same message, that strength and courage come in many forms, and that even the smallest acts of kindness and love can make a difference. The media continued to follow Grace's journey, her humble demeanor and powerful message capturing the hearts of people everywhere. But through it all, she remained the same, grounded, kind, and always focused on helping others. Andrew marveled at her resilience, her ability to stay true to herself even in the face of such overwhelming recognition. One evening, as they returned home from a speaking engagement, Grace turned to Andrew, her expression serious. "I want you to promise me something," she said, her voice firm. "Anything, Grandma," he replied, his heart tightening with anticipation. "I want you to keep following your dreams, no matter what. Don't ever let anything hold you back. You've done so much for me, but now it's time to focus on your own path. I'll always be here, cheering you on." Andrew felt his throat tighten, the depth of her love and selflessness almost too much to bear. He nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise, Grandma, but you're coming with me, wherever that path leads." She smiled, her eyes soft and full of love. "I wouldn't have it any other way." And as they sat together, watching the sun set over the horizon, Andrew knew that whatever challenges and opportunities the future held, they would face them together. Grace's story, her strength, her resilience, her unwavering love, had become a beacon of hope and inspiration for so many. It was a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of family, of love, and of never giving up. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Grace leaned back, her eyes closed, a peaceful smile on her lips. "We've come a long way, haven't we, Andrew?" He reached over, taking her hand in his heart full to bursting. "Yes, we have, Grandma, and we're not done yet." They sat there, hand in hand, the quiet night wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. And in that moment, Andrew knew that no matter where life took them, no matter what lay ahead, they would always have each other. That was their strength, their legacy, their unbreakable bond. Together, they had faced the world, and together, they would continue to inspire it. We hope you were moved and inspired by our story. We want to hear your opinion. Leave a comment below, share your impressions and your own stories of resilience and hope. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next emotional videos. Join us on this journey and follow more incredible stories. See you next time.